Indiana Jones is one of the most famous pseudo-archeologists. I call him that because when he explores ancient ruins or temples, he usually leaves nothing but rubble in his wake. Machine Games, previously known mainly from the latest Wolfenstein games, has brought us one of his previously untold adventures in digital form. And this is probably the first time since very long when I've had a chance to play as this hero. How did it turn out? What worked and what didn't? In just a moment I'll try to tell you about everything that caught my attention. If you would be so kind to like this video and subscribe to my channel, that would be great. And while you're doing those things, I'll dive right into the details. We first meet Indiana Jones when he is working as a professor at the university in the United States. One evening, however, there is a break-in at the college, and after a brief confrontation with the perpetrator, Indiana realizes that one of the statues he had recently retrieved has gone missing from the university's collection. However, he finds a clue that leads us to the Vatican, where the adventure begins for good after this short introductory level. As our story continues, we'll visit a wide variety of locations. There are plenty of classics, familiar from dozens of other games. A dry and hot biome, a cold and windy biome, a wet and full of greenery biome, but there are also a few more original spots. We'll spend long hours in some of them. Those are stages where we get to explore a larger hub with plenty things to do, both main and side missions. There are also very linear locations where we'll spend maybe an hour. The story is quite engaging, and I think it has a strong cinematic vibe reminiscent of Indiana Jones movies. For me, it gets a little too fantastical as time goes on, but maybe that's just a matter of taste. It is also worth noting that the game is set during an interesting historical period. It takes place in the 1930s, when fascism was on the rise in Europe and a certain pre-war tension was already in the air. The game looks and sounds really nice. It's hard for me to find anything to complain about here. Especially the voiceovers are worth mentioning. They are world class. The game runs, looks and sounds great. It's also worth noting that there are absolutely no visible loading screens, despite the fact that some of the areas you'll be exploring are very large. In fact, there isn't even any startup loading. While you're in the game's main menu, you can see where you last were in the background, and when you click continue, you jump right into the game almost instantly. The developers did a great job pulling that off. When it comes to complaints, once an NPC got stuck in a doorway when I played, and I couldn't get through him. I waited for a while and tried to force my way past him for another minute or so, but with no luck. Fortunately, I could reach my destination by a different route, so I didn't have to reload the game. And what are we doing while we are playing, you may ask? In a nutshell, we walk around, explore locations and try to solve puzzles that the game world and the various ancient temples, caves and catacombs found within it throws in our way. In addition to those puzzles, which I'll discuss separately in more detail in a moment, we sometimes encounter some platforming challenges along the way and more often some opposition from hostile soldiers. Let's start with the platforming. There aren't too many of those challenges, and they are usually fairly simple. Most often they consist of a combination of jumping from platform to platform, swinging across larger distances with the help of our whip, plus a bit of climbing. Additionally, you have a stamina bar that should limit your climbing endeavors to some extent, though this limitation is mostly theoretical. Throughout the entire game, I never fell off the wall or had my character let go of something due to a lack of stamina. For the enemy soldiers, first of all, I'd like to point out that not every NPC we encounter along the way will be hostile. We'll also come across plenty of ordinary residents or workers who won't pay us any attention. Also, usually soldiers themselves will only become alerted by our presence if we venture into special guarded zones, which are marked in red on the maps. This obstacle is also something we can overcome by using a right disguise. Disguises are a pretty important part of the gameplay overall. As I just mentioned, some allow us to explore enemy camps almost freely, but we also sometimes encounter places where specific clothing is mandatory, and the game won't let us enter unless we have a specific outfit. This leads to situations where certain missions can only be completed if we look like a member of a particular organization. Sometimes finding them can be quite a challenge. Honestly, for me, this was probably the biggest challenge the game presented. Collecting all disguises isn't necessary to complete the game, but I usually like to do more in games than just to follow the main objectives. And the disguises were a tough nut to crack on occasions. I even resorted to looking up the location of 2 disguises over my playthrough online. Disguises doesn't give you 100% immunity to enemies' eyes though. You still need to watch out for commanders. At that point, they are the only enemy units capable of realizing that something about you just doesn't look right. The process by which the aforementioned commanders, as well as ordinary soldiers if you don't have a disguise, can detect Indiana is quite lenient. They have to see you continuously for a good few seconds before raising the alarm. Additionally, if they take enough interest in us to check what is happening, but not enough to raise the alarm, we can also take advantage of this, since in such situations they'll approach the spot when they saw something to check what's going on there. Sometimes this can be used to lure a guard to a secluded spot out of sight of his comrades. All of that means that when you are sneaking and want to get somewhere without arousing suspicion, it is usually fairly straightforward when you already know how the game works. However, the lengthy detection process is completely bypassed if you take down one soldier in front of another or commit a theft. In those cases, all hell breaks loose in a split second. Most of the time though, even then we can try to escape, hide somewhere and wait out the alarm. Or of course fight our way out of it. Indiana is a good boxer, and the fist fighting system itself is quite satisfying. Additionally, we can use melee weapons or other items that serve as more improvised melee weapons, such as hammers, guitars, or even fly swatters. Melee weapons also let us take down an opponent with a single blow when we sneak up on them from behind. Unfortunately, they wear out quickly, and usually after taking out one, or at most 2 opponents, we have to look for a new one. However, the levels we traverse are usually littered with all sorts of useful tools of mayhem. Indiana can also take down enemies in a more Rambo-style fashion, as we also have firearms at our disposal. There are fewer of them at the beginning, but later in the game we find machine guns practically at every corner. Personally, I use them very rarely because they just didn't seem to fit into the universe for me, but there are also a few situations when the game actually forces you to put some lead into your enemies. I'll also quickly mention our character's development. This isn't an RPG, but as the game progresses, our character will be able to improve in certain aspects. This happens through the use of special manuals that we can either find or buy. To read a manual, however, we'll have to spend experience points, which our protagonist earns by completing quests and finding collectibles. In the early stages of the game, we might be a bit short on those points. Because of that, we'll sometimes have to think carefully about which skill would be most useful to us. I was able to learn practically everything, mostly because I did a lot of side activities that earned me plenty of experience. The whole process is completely optional though. It can certainly help, but on the other hand, I'll bet you could beat the game without reading a single manual. Let's now move on to the crème de la crème of this game, which are of course its puzzles. In my opinion, these are the best video game puzzles I've ever seen. For the most part, they are perfectly balanced in terms of difficulty. We usually have to pause for a moment to figure them out, but they rarely hold our progress for long. Plus, even if we get stuck, the game offers an interesting system of getting hints by taking photos. As a result, even when we have problems figuring something out, we can tackle that specific challenge for as long as we want, and we can ask for a hint whenever we decide we need one. I'm familiar with similar systems from other games, but in those, we usually automatically receive a hint after spending a certain amount of time on a puzzle. In my opinion, Indiana Jones' system is a lot better because it's up to us to decide when and if we even need a hint. On the subject of puzzles, I'll also add that they are very diverse. In fact, pretty much each one is different. To sum it up, the puzzles are just great. I had a really good time with every single one of them. The game humor is something I have to point out because I didn't expect that. The game has a few incredibly funny cutscenes. Some of them are downright absurd. It's an interesting idea and a pleasant break from the game's generally serious tone. One cutscene in particular stuck in my memory. It can literally make you roll on the floor laughing. As for the drawbacks, there aren't many. And there certainly aren't many that are truly bothersome. I would actually point out just a few things, aside from the ones I've already mentioned, like the issue with disguises, that are hard to find but necessary to complete many side quests. One thing that really annoyed me, nevertheless pretty much only the first major location is affected, were the artificial restrictions on access to certain areas. For example, I sometimes found that the objective of a side quest was hidden in the area on the map that I couldn't access until I've progressed far enough in the main story. Sometimes I wasted a lot of time trying to figure out how to get somewhere. All the doors were closed and I couldn't interact with them at all. I also didn't get any message telling me, for example, to come back later. It wouldn't be ideal, but at least I wouldn't waste so much time. After I decided that I couldn't figure it out, I switched to the main quest, went to talk to someone, and he told me to get back to exactly the same spot behind those closed doors. And this time, they swung open right in front of me without any trouble. It was very frustrating to me. My advice, if you want to avoid those problems, tackle the main quests first, then return to the previous location from the next one and complete the side quests that interest you. You'll save yourself a lot of time and nerves. Next thing, also very annoying to me, but this might just be another subjective issue. I'm talking about Gina here. Jesus, does she talk a lot. There was something about that woman that made me hope I could just leave her behind in some tomb we were exploring together. And she is our companion over many missions, unfortunately for me. I don't know if this was just me, so you can let me know in the comments if you liked her or not. Another issue that sometimes bothered me were somewhat imprecise controls in the platforming sections. Sometimes I felt like I failed to make a certain jump due to inconsistencies in the game. Of course, there's also a chance that I'm just that clumsy. That doesn't change the fact that sometimes I retried some platforming section, do everything pretty much exactly the same, and on the second try it just works. I wouldn't mind if the game were a little more forgiving in those areas. The last thing I'll mention is a minor detail. There was one instance when I fled from the enemy pursuit into an ancient tomb, hid in the spot inaccessible to him, and wanted to wait it out the alarm. The only problem was that that spot wasn't as inaccessible as I thought, because my opponent simply walked right through a wall and started beating me with his club. It cost me a bit of health, but in the end it made me laugh more than it annoyed me. I spent a little over 30 hours playing Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, and I really enjoyed myself for most of the time. I completed most of the side missions, though not all of them, so there's definitely a bit more time to be spent in the game for those who are willing. What I liked most was the game's structure and the fact that it gives us a lot of freedom in many situations, letting you decide what to do and in what order. On top of that, you get an interesting and engaging story along with the most satisfying puzzles I've ever had a chance to solve in a game. If you haven't played it yet, I highly recommend it, especially since it's still available on Game Pass. And if you have played it, let me know in the comments what you think and if there's anything I forgot that you think is worth mentioning. Thank you very much for watching until the end, you're really awesome. I'll just mention the YouTube stuff briefly again, as those are very important for the channel, so if you have a second, please like and subscribe. Until the next time, have some fun playing games. See you, bye bye.